I've known Dr. Patterson for about 700 years, and
Just seems like that.
he's, in my personal opinion, the world's leading non-retired paleoichthyologist. Dr. Patterson's works at the British Museum, was trained in London, various universities, I believe in parasitology, but he works on fossil fishes, does excellent work, knows more about fishes than most people trained in ichthyology. He's been interested in theory, biogeography, biogeographic theory, systematic theory, and now evolutionary theory. And there's hardly anything else I can say about him that he won't say for himself. So, Colin, go ahead.
Thanks.
There are two more chairs. One here, and one there. Just put that wire on the floor.
Well, Don couldn't apologize about the room, and I can't apologize about the slides because there aren't any. But I can apologize for one other thing. If it appears that I'm reading this stuff and sometimes seem surprised by what I find there, well, that's true. I am reading it. The reason why I'm surprised by it is that I only finished writing it at 5:10 this evening, and I haven't read it all through yet. My last few days in Chicago were rather hectic. Well, Don didn't give the title. My title is Evolutionism and Creationism, and I should tell you that that title was laid on me by Don Rosen. I'm speaking on it to gratify this old friend of 700 years. I've never spoken on it before, and I hope I never have to speak on it again. But it's true that for the last 18 months or so, I've been kicking around non-evolutionary or even anti-evolutionary ideas. Now, I think always before in my life, when I've got up to speak on a subject, I've been confident of one thing, that I know more about it than anybody in the room, because I've worked on it. Well, this time that isn't true. I'm speaking on two subjects, evolutionism and creationism, and I believe it's true to say that I know nothing whatever about either of them. Now, one of the reasons I started taking this anti-evolutionary view, or let's call it non-evolutionary, was last year I had a sudden realization. For over 20 years I had thought that I was working on evolution in some way. One morning I woke up and something had happened in the night, and it struck me that I'd been working on this stuff for 20 years and there was not one thing I knew about it. And that was quite a shock to learn that one could be so misled for so long. So either there was something wrong with me or there was something wrong with evolutionary theory, and naturally I know there's nothing wrong with me. So for the last few weeks I've tried putting a simple question to various people and groups of people. The question is, can you tell me anything you know about evolution? Any one thing you think is true? I tried that question on the geology staff in the Field Museum of Natural History, and the only answer I got was silence. I tried it on the members of the Evolutionary Morphology Seminar in the University of Chicago, a very prestigious body of evolutionists. And all I got there was silence for a long time, and then eventually one person said, yes, I do know one thing. It ought not to be taught in high school. Well, maybe someone here has a more convincing answer than that, something they know about evolution. The only other answer, apart from the high school one that I've had from anybody, and I've had this from several people in conversation and at meetings, is yes, they do know something. Convergence is everywhere. That's what they've learned. Well, I'll come to convergence later, but it does seem that the level of knowledge about evolution is remarkably shallow. We know it ought not to be taught in high school, and that's all we know about it. My second subject is creationism. What do we know about that? Well, we know that that ought not to be taught in high school too. And I think that's the lot again. Well, I'm not interested in the controversy over teaching in high school, and if any militant creationists have come here looking for political ammunition, I hope they'll be disappointed. But as an aside, I think I know the solution to the problems you're having with high school teaching. And the solution is to have an established religion that is taught in schools. We have one in England, the Church of England. And the creationists have no wheels to turn. There's nothing to get hold of. The children are taught in creationism already. There's no problem. But perhaps you're 200 years too late here to take that road. Anyway, I'm not talking about the high school controversy. This is called, I think, the Systematics Discussion Group, and I shall try and talk about systematics. So I want to talk about evolution and creationism as they apply to systematics. And since it is a discussion group, I aim only to be outrageous enough to get the discussion going. So I'm not here to sell you tracts, and instead I shall take the text of my sermon from this book, Gillespie's Charles Darwin and the Problem of Creation, Chicago University Press. A marvelous book, I think. I've read it twice. And I want to consider the way in which these two alternative worldviews, evolutionism and creationism, have affected or might affect systematics and systematists. Well, Gillespie's book is a historian's attempt to explain the amount of space that Darwin gave to combating the creationist argument. And Gillespie shows that what Darwin was doing was trying to replace the creationist paradigm by a positivist paradigm, a view of the world in which there was neither room nor necessity for final causes. And of course, Gillespie takes it for granted that Darwin and his disciples succeeded in this task. He takes it for granted that a rationalist view of nature has replaced an irrational one. And of course, I myself took that view up until about 18 months ago. And then I woke up and I realized that all my life I had been duped into taking evolutionism as revealed truth in some way. And from my new viewpoint, some of Gillespie's comments on pre-Darwinian creationism seem to me strikingly apt. But they're apt, of course, when I transpose them from the period he's talking about, the 1850s, to today, the 1970s and 1980s. Here's one quote from Gillespie's book. The old scientific episteme had sanctioned, or so it appeared from the new perspective, a pseudo-paradigm that was not a research-governing theory, since its power to explain was only verbal, but an anti-theory, a void that had the function of knowledge, but, as naturalists increasingly came to feel, conveyed none. Now here Gillespie is characterizing the old pre-Darwinian creationist paradigm. But I feel that what he says can just as well be applied to evolution as we understand it today. Let me repeat part of that quotation. Not a research-governing theory, since its power to explain is only verbal, but an anti-theory, a void that has the function of knowledge but conveys none. Now, of course, it must seem to you that I'm either misguided or malicious to suggest that such words can be applied to evolutionary theory. But I hope to show you that there's something in it, at least as far as systematics is concerned. Gillespie says first that creationism can't be a research-governing theory, since its power to explain is only verbal. Now, today evolution certainly seems to be a research-governing theory. Most of us think that we're working in evolutionary research. But is its explanatory power any more than verbal? Well, in systematics, the research-governing aspect of evolution is common ancestry, or descent with modification and divergence. And those of you who were at the Penny meeting in Ann Arbor last month may have heard that both Ron Brady and I, without any prior collusion, quoted the same statement. This was the statement. The explanatory value of a hypothesis of common ancestry is nil, and we attributed that statement to E.S. Russell's 1916 book, Form and Function. Now, thinking about it since then, I feel that the effect of hypotheses of common ancestry in systematics has not been merely void, not just a lack of knowledge. I think it has been positively anti-knowledge. I'll come back to that later anyway. Gillespie also says that creationism is an anti-theory, A void that has the function of knowledge but conveys none. Well, what about evolution? It certainly has a function of knowledge, but has it conveyed any? Well, we're back to the question I've been putting to people: is the one thing you can tell me about evolution? And the absence of answer seems to suggest that it is true. Evolution has not conveyed any knowledge. Or if so, I haven't yet heard it. Well, here we all are. We've all got shelves full of books on evolution. We've all read tons of them, and most of us have written one or two. And how can it be that we can have done all that, we've read these books and learned nothing from them? And how could I have worked on evolution for 20 years and learned nothing from it? Gillespie's comment: a void that has the function of knowledge but conveys none, seems to me to be very precise, very apt. But in systematics, there are pieces of evolutionary knowledge that all our heads are stuffed with. From the most general statements like eukaryotes evolved from prokaryotes, vertebrates evolved from invertebrates, down to specific ones like man evolved from apes. Well, I imagine that by now this group does appreciate that such statements exactly fit Gillespie's description: voids that have the function of knowledge but convey none. Because when analysed, all such statements say that there is a group, a real group of characters, eukaryotes, vertebrates, Homo sapiens, whatever, and opposed to it is a non-group, prokaryotes, invertebrates, apes. These are abstractions that have no characters of their own. They have no existence in nature, and therefore they cannot possibly convey knowledge, although they appear to when you first hear such statements. So in general, I'm trying to suggest two themes. The first is that evolutionism and creationism seem to me to have become very hard to distinguish, particularly lately. I've just been showing how Gillespie's vicious characterization of creationism seems to be, as I think, applicable to evolutionism, a sign that the two are very similar. Now, as you all know, there's some sort of revolution going on in evolutionary theory at the moment. It doesn't concern the fact of evolution, the general theory of evolution, descent and modification. It concerns the possible mechanisms that are responsible for transformation. Well, natural selection's under fire, and we hear a rash of new and alternative theories. So I've heard 4 in the last 6 weeks. Okay, well, here's Gillespie again on creationism in the 1850s. He says, frequently those holding creationist ideas could plead ignorance of the means and affirm only the fact. That seems to summarize the feeling I get in talking to evolutionists today. They plead ignorance of the means of transformation, but affirm only the fact. Yes, it has, we know it has taken place. Again, the two points of view seem hard to distinguish. Here's a couple more quotes from Gillespie. He's saying things on creationism that seem to me to be just as applicable to evolution today. Here's the first. The supposed credibility of the theory was merely the result of familiarity. Here's a second quote. Too much of the content of the old science was the result of intuition that was in principle unverifiable, either directly or indirectly. Now those two, to me, have a familiar ring. We hear that sort of thing in evolutionary theory all the time at the moment. Here's another quote on the change in worldview associated with the spread of evolutionary thinking in the 1860s. Just as science shifted from a theological ground to a positive one, so religion among many scientists and laymen influenced by science, shifted from religion as knowledge to religion as faith. Now, I think many people in this room would acknowledge that during the last few years, if you thought about it at all, you've experienced the shift from evolution as knowledge to evolution as faith. I know that's true of me, and I think true of a good few men in here. So that's my first theme, that evolution and creationism seem to be showing remarkable parallels. They're increasingly hard to tell apart. And the second theme is that evolution not only conveys no knowledge, but seems somehow to convey anti-knowledge, apparent knowledge, which is actually harmful to systematics. And I want to illustrate that with a couple of parables. Now, both these parables concern a diagram that I expect to be immediately familiar to all of you when I put it up. This is what it looks like. recognize it? It's the diagram that Ernst Mayr has used in his repeated explanations of the true method in systematics, of evolutionary systematics. My first version of the diagram, the first parable, it looks like that. That's the version that came out in Science last week. The marks along the lines are autapomorphies of A, B, and C, except for that one, which is a synapomorphy of B and C. And in Mayer's paper in Science last week, C is man, B is the chimpanzee, our sister group, according to Mayer, and A is not named, but I will assume it's the gorilla. I think I do him no injustice in assuming that. Now here's what Mayer says. The main difference between cladists and evolutionary taxonomists is in the treatment of autapomorph characters. Instead of automatically giving sister groups the same rank, the evolutionary taxonomist ranks them by considering the relative weight of their autapomorphies, and then he refers to this diagram. And he goes on, one of the striking autapomorphies of man, in comparison to his sister group, the chimpanzee, is the possession of Broca's center in the brain, a character that is closely correlated with man's speaking ability. This single character is for most taxonomists of greater weight in various synapomorphies between man and apes. The particular importance of autapomorphies is that they reflect the occupation of new niches and new adaptive zones that may have more biological significance than synapomorphies. That's the end of the quote. Well, there are several things one might say about that statement, but not all of them will be polite, so I'll just point out that both the statement and the diagram are intended to imply knowledge of evolution. The diagram in the different angles of the lines there, and the statement in referring to things like new niches and new adaptive zones, biological significance of certain characters, and so on. But when I first read that passage in Science, it immediately reminded me of something. An episode in the history of evolution that many of you may recall, something that was called the Great Hippocampus Question. The Great Hippocampus Question is recorded in fiction in Charles Kingsley's novel, his children's book, The Water Babies. In fact, not in fiction, it was a controversy that lasted through 1861 and 1862 between Richard Owen and T.H. Huxley. Richard Owen was a creationist, T.H. Huxley was an evolutionist. Owen, the creationist, insisted that man was quite distinct from the apes and couldn't be related to them by descent or any other physical link, because the brain of man contained a certain center, the hippocampus, that was absent in apes. And T.H. Huxley insisted that man was related to the apes because the apes' brain, so he said, contained a center that was homologous to the hippocampus. The row went on for 2 years, and eventually, as usual, T.H. Huxley won. But here we are, 120 years later, and we have Ernst Mayr, the evolutionist, insisting that man is quite distinct from the apes because the brain of man contains a certain center, Broca's center, that is absent in apes. Mayr even goes on to cite Julian Huxley, T.H. Huxley's grandson, and with some approval in his Kingdom Psychozoa, if you remember that. It all begins to sound very familiar, doesn't it? And yet notice how the roles have become reversed. The part of Owen, the creationist, the hippocampus, is now taken by Mayr, the evolutionist, Broca's center. And the part of T.H. Huxley, the evolutionist, is now taken by the cladists, who most people now cite as anti-evolutionists. Many do. Bev Halstead, who I'm sure needs no introduction here, has published a paper called In Bed with the Creationists, in which he calls me a devoted disciple of Sir Richard Owen. So be it. The wheel has gone right the way around. The evolutionist is now taking just the stand that the creationist took 120 years ago. Broca's center equals the hippocampus. Now, this parable reinforces the point I was making earlier, that evolutionists and creationists are now hard to distinguish. But I want to use it to make another point about evolution being an anti-theory that conveys anti-knowledge. It's harmful to systematics. Look what Mayer's recommending. He recommends that man be maintained in a taxon of high rank, distinct from the apes. And and look at what prompts him to that recommendation. It is his apparent knowledge of evolution. The fact that man has evolved at an exceptional rate, has invaded a new adaptive zone, and so on and so on. And those evolutionary facts justify a taxon of high rank. And then look at the consequence of his recommendation. Man is removed in a taxon of high rank, and the apes are left as a paraphyletic group. A group without characters, and therefore with no individuality or reality, and therefore an abstraction that is beyond criticism. And what can one then say? That man evolved from the apes. One can say something about evolution. It seems to me we have another statement that has the appearance of knowledge, but in fact contains none. A piece of anti-knowledge derived from evolutionary theory. And rather than comment further on this, I'll quote what T.H. Huxley said of Owen in 1861. This is again referring to Hippocampus' question. Here's Huxley writing to Hooker, April the 27th, 1861. I do not believe that in the whole history of science there is a case of any man of reputation getting himself into such a contemptible position. Well, now I'd like to go on to the second parable and return again to the same diagram, but I'd like you now to think of the way in which it was previously used by Ernst Mayr in his 1969 book and his 1974 paper on systematics. At that time it looked like this. And also numbers on here. 15%, 10%, can't remember the other one, 7%. Now, at that time, I was trying to put some precision into evolutionary systematics. And he said, let A be the common ancestor of B, C, D. And suppose that the genome of B has diverged from the ancestral genome by 15%, that of C has diverged by 10%, and D has moved off rapidly into some new adaptive zone and diverged by 70%. Then he said we should be quite wrong to classify C with D, which is, of course, its nearest relative by common ancestry, because relationship means inferred amount of shared genotype, not the inferred recency of common ancestry. And here, it's a fairly simple sum. B and C share 75% of the ancestral genotype, and C and D share only 30%. And to show the kind of mistakes that might be made, I said that a foolish systematist might group crocodiles with birds rather than with other reptiles, or might group African apes with man rather than with the orangutan. So Mayr, from his knowledge of evolution, was making predictions about the genotypes of crocodiles and of African apes. In the first example, crocodiles and birds and reptiles, he predicts that the proportion of genotype shared by C, the crocodile, and B, another reptile, will be greater than the proportion shared by C, the crocodile, and D, the bird. So he predicts that in terms of shared genotype, BC will be greater than CD. Okay? Now notice that Mayr is demonstrating the explanatory power here of a hypothesis of common ancestry, something that I suggested had zero explanatory power. And he's also demonstrating the knowledge of evolution. Right, here's a theory that makes a prediction, and we can test it. Last month in Ann Arbor, a student of Maurice Goodman's gave me the amino acid sequences for alpha and beta hemoglobin of 3 crocodilians, a caiman, the Nile crocodile, and the Mississippi alligator. We already knew the alpha and beta hemoglobin sequences of 2 birds, a chicken and a goose. But the problem is finding other reptiles. And as far as I know, the only other reptile available at the moment is the alpha hemoglobin sequence of a snake, the viper. Well, alpha hemoglobin is 143 amino acids long. That equals 3 times that. I've written it down, I can't work it out. 429 amino nucleotides. That's a very small sample of the genotype, but at least it's worth checking. And the prediction is that the amino acids common to B, which is the viper, C is a crocodile. V is for this exposition of chicken, that BC will be greater than CD. And here are the proportions that you find. BC equals 8 out of 143. That means the same amino acid at 8 of the 143 positions, which is 5.6%. CD, that's the crocodile bird proportion, 25 out of 143, which is 17.5%. And the other possibility is CD being shared by the viper and the chicken, and there we've got 15 out of 143, it's 10.5%. Right, here we are. The theory made a prediction, we tested it, and the prediction is falsified decisively. CD far outweighs the BC. The BC is minute. So something was wrong with the prediction, something wrong with the theory. But of course, as we all know, falsification is never absolute, because you're never sure what it is you falsified. And here there seem to be only three possibilities. First, you falsified the data. There's something wrong with alpha hemoglobin. Second, you falsified the diagram. There's something wrong about the system of relationships of the snakes, birds, and crocodiles. And third, you falsified Mayer's knowledge of evolution, either the particular stuff about rates and adaptive zones or something more general. Well, we can check one of those three, the data, by taking another sample of the genome. We know the myoglobin sequence for one crocodile, two birds, including a chicken, and two other reptiles, a varani lizard and a turtle. Myoglobin is bigger, 153 amino acids long, slightly larger sample of the genome. If in this case B is a lizard, Varanus, C is a croc again, D is a chicken, and this is for myoglobin. This time we get BC is 16 out of 153. Yes, which is 10.5%. CD, that's the crocodile bird, 13 out of that, which is 8.5%. And the third one, BD, that's the lizard bird, is 16 out of that, 10.5% again. Now this time, the BC proportion of the genotype is larger than the CD, slightly larger, as I predicted. Now hang on a moment, what's happened here? What's this BD? This ought to be by far the smallest proportion of the genome, and yet it's exactly the same as the BC. Something's gone wrong again. And again, there are the three possibilities. Is it the data, is it the diagram, or is it the theory? But in fact, if we think about the diagram, this data suggests a different diagram. BC is the same as BD. The only possibility, dichotomy, like that. Perhaps the diagram is wrong. All right, let's check again with the turtle. Turtle myoglobin. This time, B is turtle. Some kind of terrapin, as far as I remember. C is crocodile again, D is chicken, and these are myoglobin figures. And this time we get, I won't bother with the numbers, I'll just put the percentages. BC, 11.8%. Oh, I've written that in already. CD is 5.2%. And BD, the turtle bird, 5.9%. Now we're getting closer to what Meyer expected. BC is much larger than CD here. But again, there's another problem. The BD portion, the third turtle, which should be tiny, is actually larger than the CD. So again, something's wrong. Well, this data suggests a different diagram. It suggests one like this. So B and C go together, and D is separate. Sorry, I'm losing myself. So it seems with these three examples, either we get the right diagram as we did with the first sample with a viper and alpha hemoglobin, but we had the wrong proportions, or we get the right proportions as here, but the wrong diagram, or we get a set of data that's just agnostic that gives us a trichotomy. So what is it that we're falsifying each time here? Well, there aren't any more croc or lizard sequences available to check with. More reptile sequences. Two things we might do. One is to accept Meyer's assumption that reptiles are a group, and to sum up the data and take averages. If you add together the three kinds of bee, the turtle, the viper, and the lizard, and the three kinds of crocodile, and the three kinds of chicken. When you do that, the three summations are for BC you get 27.9, for CD you get 30.9, for BD you get 26.9. They're virtually identical. At least I suggest that only a maniac passively would try to distinguish between those numbers. And effectively they're all the same, and the diagram they give you is this diagram, the dichotomy. Well, that's not very informative. So the other thing we might do is accept Gary Nelson's optimistic view that every set of data is a glimpse of the truth. And we might combine the three cladograms. All right, let's see that, try that and see what we get. Comes out like this. This is B1, snake. This is C, croc. This is B3. Turtle, B2, the lizard, and this is G, the chicken. Right, that's the cladogram we're getting out of this amino acid data. Do you like it? No, I imagine you don't. So what do? Well, I'll play one more of these games and then I drop it. As I said, we've got no more reptile sequences, but we have plenty of mammal sequences. So let's try mammals. I think if we were to put mammals with birds and crocodiles in Meyer's diagram, again, I would do him no injustice if I assume that the diagram would look like this. Let B be a mammal. Here's C, the common ancestor. Mammals have diverged very far in one direction. Crocodiles have gone a little way in the other one. Birds have then gone off a long way like that. B mammals, C crocodiles, D birds. Okay, B is man, C is a crocodile, D is a chicken again. And if we use alpha hemoglobin data, this is what we get. BC, 7.7%. That's shared by man and crocodile. CD, shared by crocodile and bird, 7.7%. BD, shared by man and bird, 14.7%. Now what the heck is going on? BC should be smaller than CD if the diagram is roughly right. In fact, they're both the same. BD should be the smallest of all, the two are miles apart. In fact, it's by far the largest. Something is wrong. Well, I don't know what an evolutionist would do with this, but I can guess. When I ask people about evolution, the only answer I get from them is convergence is everywhere. And I'm pretty sure they would take this as an example of convergence, and they would redraw the diagram. After all, birds and mammals have converged into the endothermic adaptive zone. This hemoglobin data might be giving you another instance of convergence. But it won't do. For here, the BC and CD proportions of the genotype are the same. What am I talking about? Not the faintest idea. Not the faintest. Oh, I see what I mean, yes. Sorry. First time I put it up, I meant to put it like this. But that won't do because these are both the same distance from C, so you have to do it like this. They converge until the bird and mammal converge until they're identical. But then the problem is that they each differ from the turtle by 7.7%, but those 7.7% are entirely different. They have to be apart somehow by 15%. Whatever you do with it, convergence won't explain it. There's something funny in there. So, after all, the question does seem insoluble. There is one more thing we can do with this. This data does give us a diagram. It's not the diagram that's there. It says that birds and mammals go together, and crocodiles are less different. So we can follow Gary's recommendation. We can combine the phagogram and add mammals here. And there's the phagogram we get up that was playing around. You like that any better? No, I'm sure you don't. So what do? Well, luckily I don't have to keep asking these rhetorical questions because I'm talking about Meyer's example and I know what he did. If you remember, Meyer published his original diagram in talking about proportions of genome in 1974, when there were very few samples of genome available in the form of protein or amino acid or nucleic acid sequences. And the two examples he offered to conform to his example were birds and crocs and men and apes. Well, since 1974, we've had abundant samples of the genome of men and apes. And far from matching his scheme, they all say the same thing, that chimps and people differ in less than 1% of the genome. So Meyer's prediction was falsified there. And as I said before, falsification is never absolute. And in this case, I suggested that there are three possible things that might be false: the genome data, the diagram, or the claims about evolution. Well, with men and apes, Meyer still believes the diagram, and he still believes he knows about evolution, so all that can be wrong is the data. So he dropped the genome and returned to morphology, and so last week we got Broca's center and the hippocampus question all over again, or its modern equivalent. So there are 2 points to be made there. The first concerns another of the parallels between evolutionism and creationism. Back in 1974, Meyer appealed to the genotype as the holder of true knowledge. And at that time, the genotype was still very much a mystery. Now that we have samples of the genotype from a wide variety of organisms, so it's no longer quite so mysterious, it's dropped, and a new mystery is proposed, Broca's center and that long list of unspecifiable haplomorphies of man. It seems that just like creationists, evolutionists are liable to appeal to mystery. The second point is a much more important one, and it concerns the levels at which we can investigate characters in systematics. The traditional level is morphology, and we're all pretty familiar with morphology. We feel at home with morphological data and competent to handle it, despite its complexity. We have a good grasp of what homology means at the morphological level, and we have the transformations of ontogeny as a guide in ordering characters into transformation series. Well, back in 1978, Gary Nelson suggested, quoting him, the concept of evolution is an extrapolation or interpretation of the orderliness of ontogeny. And so far as I know, at the morphological level, that's still true. And as Gary said, it's von Bayer's law that ontogeny moves from the general to the particular that is behind the transformations we invoke in morphology, and behind the systematic hierarchy we built on those morphological characters. Now, of course, all the characters the transformations we invoke are not directly observed in ontogeny, but I think you'll find that every transformation that is inferred is congruent with von Bayer's law, with characters tied to von Bayer's law. So at the morphological level, we have a sound concept of homology, and we have ontogeny to help us in ordering homologies. Morphology, or in the most general terms, the phenotype, is the highest level of investigation in systematics. The next level down is the level of gene products, proteins. Now here the concept of homology becomes vaguer. In the first place, we have the problem of horology. Horology is what the people who play with protein sequences call the relation between gene products that they think are the result of gene duplication. So horology is a molecular version of serial homology in morphology. The difference is that in morphology, you can be fairly sure that two structures are serial homologs because you have ontology in which to observe whether they really are duplications of some rudiment. But with protein sequences and this question of horology, inferred gene duplication, the inferred duplication is somewhere back in the past, there's no way of investigating it. And it does seem to me that gene duplication is often invoked simply to explain away awkward data. Anyway, when you're comparing two protein sequences as a whole, rather than amino acid by amino acid, homology for a molecular biologist is a purely statistical concept. You compare the two sequences, and if the matches between them pass certain statistical tests, they're homologous. There was a paper by Doolittle in Science 2 weeks ago explaining this concept. Well, having decided that two sequences as a whole are homologous, you can then align them and compare them position by position. And a match at any one position, that is the same amino acid, is a homology at a finer level. But here the problem is whether the amino acid is really the same in inverted commas. Now, because of the redundancy of the genetic code, there are only 2 amino acids out of the 20, tryptophan and methionine, that are coded by a single triplet. All the rest are coded by 2 or more. So there are only 2 amino acids that are always the same in terms of the triplets that code them. And they are the rarest amino acids. They account for less than 2% of the average sequence. So all the other amino acids are coded by 2 or more triplets. So at the amino acid level, the protein level, the gene product level, a match can never be treated, or hardly ever be treated, as a homology at the DNA level, if you're making a guess. So at the gene product level, homology becomes a pretty vague concept. And also, we don't have ontogeny at the gene product level in which to help us order the homologies into transformation series. Now, I used to think that because there is no ontogeny in proteins, yet somehow we seem to need the notion of transformation to order them, to order the sequences, that they provided some sort of proof of evolution. And I'm no longer sure that follows, because the homologies we infer, and the transformations that we infer in ordering them, are subject to this uncertainty because of the ambiguity of the genetic code. So the real molecular homologies must lie further down at the level of DNA. Well, at the level of DNA, we still know virtually nothing because there's hardly any comparative data in the form of sequences that can be aligned and compared. But last Saturday, up in Ann Arbor, I was lucky enough to meet Arnold Kluge and talk him out of the first such set of these datas, DNA sequences. This is mitochondrial DNA of man, chimpanzee, gorilla, orangutan, and gibbon. The work was done by Prager and Wilson and their group at Berkeley, and the sequences are each 896 nucleotides long. So, let's start again. I'm sorry to bore you with all this, but it does have a point in the end. I'm talking here about mitochondrial DNA. We've got 896 nucleotides. And of those, 612 are invariant and the rest vary. And this is the most parsimonious tree that the Berkeley people got out of the data. It'll write up what the animals are. I'm going to use letters to say time. A is man, B is chimp, C is gorilla, D is orang, and E is gibbon. And this is their tree. The numbers on here are the evolutionary events per lineage.
Colin, that's not a Bush parsimonious tree, it's a fish Margoliash tree.
Isn't. Excuse me, but they do discuss that, Steve. It isn't.
But you've got decimal points in there.
Then they don't know what they're doing. I'm sorry. I can't apologize for them because I'm sure I wasn't even supposed to see their manuscript. But they do talk about they did a fish Margoliash program and got a different tree. Never mind. This is the tree they chose. Let's just say that. Those numbers are evolutionary events per lineage, and this tells us lots of things about evolution. For example, it says gorilla has evolved fastest and man slowest. It says that mitochondrial DNA evolves about 10 times as fast as nuclear DNA. It says that silent substitutions are several times as likely as coding substitutions, and that's been the result of every comparison of DNA sequences that's yet been done. Okay, that's what the evolutionists made of the data. Now, will you permit me to show you what a creationist makes of it? We've got 5 taxa, A, B, C, D there. So the first set of characters that we need to look at are the ones that pick 4 out of those 5. And here's how they fall out. A, B, C, D, there are 66 characters. That's the same nucleotide in those 4 and a different one in each. A, B, C, D, there are 53. A, B, D, there are 21. A, C, D, E, there are 19. And B, C, D, E, there are 40. Well, there are 2 strong signals here. 53 there and 66 there. A, B, C, D and A, B, C, E. But unfortunately, those 2 groups are incongruent. The 2 strong signals are incongruent one with the other, so it's best to treat these rather than groupings of 4 as estimates of the autapomorphies of each line. So Gibbon has 66 autapomorphies, Orang has 53, Gorilla has 21, Chimp has 19, and Man has only 14. Notice that's the exact reverse of my prediction. These aren't exact counts for the autapomorphies, but they're close enough. So we get no useful grouping out of that. The next set of characters is the ones that pick out 3 of the 5. And here's how they fall out. A, B, C, we get 30 characters. A, B, D, we get 11. A, C, D, C, D, E, we get 10. A, D, E, we get 9. A, B, E, and B, C, D, we get 7. B, D, E, there are 4. The last 2, A, C, D, and B, C, E, there are 3 of each. Right, there's 1 signal here. A, B, and C form a group. Since there are 10 ways of picking 3 species out of 5, the probability of a repetition by chance in that sort of data is 1 in 10. This group has 19 repetitions over its nearest competitor. So as far as I understand it, the chance of getting a signal like that, the probability of getting a signal like that purely by chance, 10 to the minus 18. Is that true, Steve?
No.
No? All right. Why is it not true? What should we do that out of it?
It's a long story, but then so is the rest of the seminar.
So the rest of what?
The seminar, I said.
Would you rather I dropped all this?
Oh, no,
I
no.
will.
Keep on.
No, I'll go on with just the next bit. The last class of characters is the one that pick out 2 from the 5. Again, there are 10 of them. I won't bother to list them all. There's only one that gives a signal, it's DE. The rest of them are grouped very much like this with, as far as I can see, no distinguishable differences between them. And here the probability, according to my calculation, I'm sorry, Steve, is 10 to the minus 17. So as I understand this data, the information that's in there is that there are two groups. There's ABC and CE, and together they form a larger group. And that's all the data says. It also gives an estimate of the number of autapomorphies of each group. And if you prefer this as a cladogram, of course, it can come out as like that, trichotomy and a dichotomy.
But that's...
Now, I assume that Steve Farris will not agree, but that's data. There isn't any more. So, what about the tree here and the numbers on the branches? Well, as Steve said, it's produced by a program. Those numbers don't pop out of the data in any way. So I suppose, and I hope Steve won't disagree, that they come from massaging the data with evolutionary theory, with a program that assumes evolution to be true and tells the computer to find a tree. So my question will be, what is the tree telling us about? Is it telling us something about nature or something about evolutionary theory? One last thing, at this level, the level of DNA, we also have the problem of homology. What does homology mean in terms of DNA? The alignment procedure is the same as with protein sequences. It's a purely statistical business. But because in DNA we only have 4 possible nucleotides at any one position, we expect a 25% match by chance alone. And amongst these 5 very closely related species, there is only a 70% match. That leaves 45% of variation to accommodate all other eukaryotes. I think that the problems with sequence alignment in DNA as the data start coming will be extreme. Then at the level of individual nucleotides, we have to assume that a match at one position, say an adenine at the same position in all of these, is a homology. And a mismatch is a non-homology. So bearing that notion of homology in mind, let's look again at the tree. The tree tells us that the... No, I'm going to forget all that. Steve's right me off it. I was going to talk about the effect of putting data through a tree generation program. The creationist makes one assumption, that there are some groups in a set of data. The evolutionist, I think, has to make another assumption, that there are some groups in there, and that the groupings tell us something about the history of the groups. And it seems to follow from that. Sorry.
Which creationist?
No, all right, me.
You don't mean Wayne Gish.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I mean a creationist systematist.
Dwayne Gish doesn't make any assumptions.
Oh, yes, he does.
Oh, no.
To me,
It was all revealed.
I think I'm able to treat that DNA data, taking all of it as saying something, but I only find two signals in it. In order to get a tree out of it, you have to say that some of it is good data, the stuff that gives you that, and some of it is bad data, the stuff that gives you that and gives you that. It turns out in this case that the stuff that gives you BC and AB is more than twice as numerous as the stuff that gives you BC that's preferred. Now what is it that's being compared here? These are all identities at the nucleotide level. The ones that give you AB are identities, the ones that give you BC are identities, the ones that give you CA, they're all identities at the nucleotide level. It's somehow you're having to say that some of those identities are really the same, and some of them are not the same, because the theory demands that. It seems to me somehow nonsensical. There's one more problem with homology at DNA level, and that's this business of chirality, of inferred duplication. There's a similar problem coming into sight with DNA. A couple of weeks ago, Roger Lewin had a piece in Science on globin genes, and in it he touched on a model of DNA that's now fashionable amongst molecular geneticists. He called it the Vesuvius model, and the simple description of it by Roger Lewin and Gabriel Dover, people like that, is that every gene is constantly bombarding the rest of the genome with pseudogenes, which are more or less perfect copies of itself. Now, if this is so, and the model does have empirical support, then the problem of virality, of duplication in DNA data is even more pressing. In order to do DNA sequencing, you mince up the genome and clone a bit that you think's right that you can get out. And if there really are all these bombarding pseudogenes lying around, I see no possible way of knowing whether you've got the right bit or not. Well, I'm sorry to have gone on so long about that. The point of it is that I think it has something to say about evolution. We've had a lot of discussion in the last few years over whether evolution is testable. And by evolution here I mean the general theory that descent and modification, species are mutable and related by descent, rather than any specific theory about mechanism. Now, if the general theory of evolution is testable, it must have some consequence that can be confronted with reality. In other words, it must make some prediction. And so far as I know, only one sensible prediction has been offered. Niles Eldredge put it like this in the letter to Science. If evolution is descent with modification, a hierarchical array of organisms defined by nested sets of evolution... Sorry. Let me start again. If evolution is descent with modification, a hierarchical array of organisms defined by nested sets of evolutionary novelties must result. This is evolution's grand prediction. And then Niles went on to say that whatever organism you look at, whatever aspects of it you study, you find the same hierarchy. And I've heard the same point made repeatedly at meetings. But there really is a hierarchy, and there can be no hierarchy without history, and therefore the prediction of evolution is meant. Well, the first thing that strikes me about this is that it seems to imply that evolution is a deductive inference from the systematic hierarchy. That people like Linnaeus and Cuvier and Agassiz and Johannes Müller and Hooker and 1,000 other pre-Darwinians were merely forethinkers, that they failed to see the necessary consequence of their observation. Now that seems improbable. And the second thing concerns the prediction that whatever aspect of organisms you look at, you find the same hierarchy. Well, not everyone seems to agree with that. Here's Ernst Mayr again in Science last week. Different types of characters, morphological characters, chromosomal differences, enzyme genes, regulatory genes, and DNA matching may lead to rather different groupings. Different stages in life cycles may also result in different groupings. And here's Arnold Kluge with the conclusion of his holistic study of apes and men. He says that his study denotes a clear lack of congruence between molecular and other more traditional kinds of data. Notice they're both saying the same. Mayr is saying that the molecular data, at whatever level you look at it, doesn't seem to match morphology, and Arnold Kluge is saying the same. Now, the prediction of evolution, according to Niles, is that hierarchy and congruent hierarchy is what you will find no matter what aspect of the species you look at. The experience of Mayr and of Arnold Kluge is that there is no such congruence. In particular, the molecular data are incongruent with morphology. Well, is that so? I'm not sure, but I think there are other signs of it amongst the protein sequences. For example, that cladogram of amniotes that I was building up earlier is wildly incongruent with everything we think we know about morphology. And there are published globing cladograms that have birds as the sister group of mammals, not of crocodiles, and snakes as the sister group of all other amniotes, and so on. Never mind the details of it, let me put the question at the most basic level. How is it we recognize the hierarchy? At the level of the phenotype, I think we have no real problem. We have a fairly rational concept of homology, and I agree with Gary that the organizing principle is ontogeny, and von Baer's law in particular.